Hi, my name is Kai, and I'm a Beyond Differences Teen Board member. The mission of Beyond Differences is to raise awareness of social isolation and to end social isolation in middle schools nationwide. I'm here with other Teen Board members for a new panel discussion series we call Beyond Engaged. I'm here with Chiqui, Alder, Gio, Javonté, and Sicily. Today we're going to talk about social isolation, which takes a new meaning during the time of COVID-19. So let's kick off today's talk with a short film which I think many of us can relate to. Let's roll it.
Do like a burst and then I'll jump. I love being a teenager. Hands on me. Hands on me. Can I change? Are you learning? I'm staying here. I'm gonna eat. You look like you're on crack. I can't wait. Hold on.
Wow, that had me tearing up at the end there. I don't think before this I've been able to really express what quarantine has felt like for me, and I I think I've questioned whether my feelings of grief or fear or loneliness were even valid if I'm here sitting safe at home. That's how I felt like I've related to the video. What about you guys?
I think I can relate to that, just kind of sitting down and doing work and just being alone in my house. And all of that was kind of similar to my experience. And just as quarantine grew longer and having to do school at home and everything, I think I could definitely relate to like just getting more almost angry that that's even what my senior year ended up being.
Yeah, I definitely feel like she captured the monotony behind being trapped within a screen because that's kind of what our lives have become is even this, we have to communicate between a screen on Zoom as even just like FaceTiming your friend, like how they had it flashing between the different days and her sitting in the same spot doing the same work. In addition, I loved how they panned around the room at the beginning, showing the photos and almost like she's reminiscing on the life before coronavirus and before quarantine. And yeah, I think the video did an amazing job at just capturing a feeling that everyone is experiencing right now.
I like how the video, it showed her computer and all the assignments she was missing. I know that was a really big change for all of us, and I could really relate to that, just feeling like every day was so repetitive and, just that feeling of loneliness.
Like, it's been months now that we've been in quarantine, and it feels like this is just the new normal now, and it's crazy how you could have never even imagined this, like, before. I remember when we left school, it was like, oh, we'll be out for 2 weeks, then we'll be back. And then it's like, oh, we'll be back next year. And like, it just keeps, extending and extending. And it's just crazy how much we've just gotten used to it and kind of almost already, I feel like I've already kind of forgotten what it's like to not be in the pandemic.
I think when we first went into quarantine, we all didn't really know what to expect. But over time, as time progressed, we all just became overwhelmed with like having to repeat the same day over and over again, and being inside can really become very pressuring. And what really resonated with me is that the creator was able to convey so much emotion without speaking.
Right, Javonté, the film had no dialogue, yet it was able to convey how numbing and even soul-crushing this disconnection can be. I'd like to think that if anything positive comes out of it, it's that loneliness has become a collective experience, and with it, empathy and awareness around it. How do we spot social isolation?
Yeah, like when spotting social isolation in school, there are a variety of different ways that social isolation can occur. Mm-hmm. So one, it could just be the stereotypical thing where you see someone sitting alone at the lunch table or not being invited to play football or ultimate frisbee on the playground. But it can also just be invisible. Like, one of the main things is someone could have a friend group and still feel socially isolated.
I agree. I feel like when we think about social isolation, a lot of times we name it as like this big, very obvious problem. And in some cases it can be, but a lot of times it isn't. It can be really, really subtle things. And like you said, Alder, you could even have a friend group, but not feel close to anybody or really feel welcome or accepted, or like anybody really wants you to be there. And that can be isolating in and of itself. And I think there's a lot of small ways, even in our like regular interactions now and our mannerisms, I feel like it's become so common to be talking to people and to be on your phone and to not really ever be giving people your full attention. And that in and of itself also can feel really isolating.
Yeah, we could be mindlessly social isolating others, just like Chiqui said. And to add to that, we can even be isolating others on social media. It can take many forms. If we were on the receiving end of this for an extended period, social isolation can actually impact our health, both mentally and physically.
Yeah, so social isolation has often been compared to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, because it can often lead to chronic disease, such as coronary heart disease, as well as an increase in the chance of having a stroke later in life. And so this increase, it can cause an increase in cortisol, which will impair your cognitive ability, so it might be more difficult to complete schoolwork. It can also compromise your immune system and just kind of lead to vascular problems later in life. And in addition, it can often be one of the root causes for depression and anxiety.
I think that being socially isolated definitely caused me to be more anxious in social situations. I became much more concerned about what I said and what that would cause other people to think of me. I think that I became much more nervous to interact with new people just because of the experiences that I had in middle school. And so I can definitely say from personal experience, when someone's socially isolated, it not only impacts them in those relationships where they're isolated, but also in following relationships where they might be anxious to be bold in a conversation or to present ideas that might be a little bit more risky. I think it causes people to kind of tone themselves down.
Yeah, I think social isolation can really impact your identity. Normally you have your friend group and you have people around you, and you see what other people are doing and you're kind of discovering together and you're learning together, and sometimes you're unsure of who you are, but there's other people who are unsure, so it's less scary, and there's people around you to kind of help you in that process. But if you're socially isolated, suddenly you have no one to kind of bounce ideas off or learn from or think about things about. And if you're confused and you're trying to figure out who you are and there's no one else that you can see going through that, it can be really scary and really lonely.
That leads to a bigger problem of not being able to tell anybody how you're feeling. You feel like there's no one around you that you can talk to.
Social isolation, as many of you guys already said, that it affects you in so many different ways. Um, like it can really alter your social behavior and also how you perform academically. Um, like academically, it can really affect you because you don't feel that you don't have the confidence to perform at your fullest capability, and you don't you also can't, like as you guys said, speak up to ask for the help that you need.
And when no one can help you, there's no end to the cycle of loneliness. If you're suffering for months or even years, as you guys said, it can lead to anxiety, depression, trouble at school, even drug abuse and suicidal thoughts. If you're wondering why social isolation triggers such negative effects, it's because we are all hardwired to connect. It was an evolutionary necessity. Back in the day, survival was based on belonging, and if you weren't part of a tribe where food and shelter were provided, you just wouldn't survive. Flash forward to today, we can physically survive social isolation, but our nervous system can't, and it goes into fight or flight mode. And this raises our stress levels and is bad for our health. So that sort of explains the science behind all this, but it also explains that this pain is real. You can't just simply say, oh, kids will be kids, because humans aren't equipped to cope with social isolation, and we shouldn't have to make them. So let's discuss what we can do. What can students do? What can adults or even schools do to combat social isolation?
I think something we can all do as a community is to actively try to celebrate each other's differences, and that's I think that's the core mission of Beyond Differences, and we try to uphold that mission, embed that mission into all of our programs, such as Know Your Classmates, Be Kind Online, and No One Meets Alone. And I think something else we can all do is just have an open mind and be open to learning something new about our peers, and um, maybe learn something about their culture, because that can really make them feel as if they're seen and valued.
One of the most important things that I feel like we've done through Beyond Differences is just acknowledging that differences are okay, and even more than that, acknowledging that we should celebrate each other's differences, and notice the places where students might be isolated because of certain differences, and kind of seeing where like racism and ableism and homophobia play into that, and just acknowledging that students' differences are good and that we should celebrate those instead of bringing them down.
Yeah, and your comment just kind of leads into like how we need to restructure a lot of our lesson plans from like an educational standpoint. So one of the things is that social isolation can also come from within if someone feels that if they're not represented, or if they just don't feel as if they fit into a community because of their differences. So that's going to, a big thing that can like, we can help like impact that and change that is once again through representation, changing what we teach to students about maybe their culture instead of just like teaching what we have in the past. So yeah, just kind of working on representation in a classroom would have a huge impact.
I agree. Representation is so important. And I also think when we're trying to fight social isolation, it really has to start with the individual too. You know, if we want to build an inclusive school community, it has to start with all of us trying to be inclusive in our everyday lives and coming into every situation thinking, how am I going to be inclusive? How am I going to make sure that no one's left out here? Whether that means like during a group project, you know, going and asking the person who looks a little confused or like they maybe don't have someone to partner with to be your partner rather than going to your friend like you normally would. And it's, you know, it goes into online too. If you go out with your friends and you take some cute beach pics, like, is someone going to be hurt that they weren't there if you post those? Like, is it really worth posting your cute pictures and ruining a friendship and making someone feel bad and isolated? And just really always thinking, how are my actions affecting others? Am I being inclusive or am I being exclusive? And trying your best to make sure that everyone feels welcomed.
We have differences, but we also have a lot in common. And the more we know about our classmates and each other, the more we'll connect.
As many of you already said, social isolation is like very hard to notice to some people, which is why I find it very important to just make sure that you're like checking in with some of your peers if you notice that they're kind of not really engaging in certain activities and some of the normal things that they would do, because just checking in with someone can really make them feel valued and heard.
Yeah, another aspect of the Beyond Differences curriculum that could be incorporated into classrooms is we like to talk about compliments a lot, because they can have a huge impact on just a person's confidence. And yeah, I just think it's one of the more beneficial things and one of the more simple things that you can do.
And getting a compliment can be really helpful to just, you know, let you know that, you know, you're okay, you're valid, and you're helping people and you're doing good and we appreciate you and we see you and we hear you.
It's those compliments, those steps to acknowledge someone for who they are and the things they've done, that helps. And that opens their bubble. It shows them that there's people around them that support them and that are there for them.
I love these suggestions, and I'd like to add, helping middle schoolers understand what social isolation is a fundamental step, and understanding how our small and unintentional actions can contribute to other people's loneliness is another important step. During this time of social distancing, it may seem like we're powerless to combat social isolation, but I'd like to end off this session with 4 tips to help alleviate social isolation during this time. These tips come from a book called Together by Dr. Vivek Murthy.
Something I'd recommend from the book is just the idea of taking the time, at least 15 minutes a day, to just FaceTime, text, call someone you love, and just let them know that you're there and that you're thinking about them.
Another thing that we can do is take the day to just put down our phones and forget about Instagram and Snapchat and all those other social media platforms, and really spend the day with our family and friends and have that in-person conversation and hang out somewhere fun and just really get to know them.
Yeah, I think that my takeaway was that embracing solitude is really important in quarantine. For me, I've found like a lot of hobbies that allow me to kind of sit by myself and reflect. Like he says in the book, it's just really important to kind of like anchor yourself and make sure that you're grounded and you're able to be involved in what's around you. And I think that's really beneficial.
The last tip that Dr. Murthy gives us in his book is about service. Because when we're lonely, 2 things happen. The first thing is that we start to center ourselves and our own situation and our own feelings and our well-being, and that makes it much more difficult to connect with others, which is already the issue. The second thing that happens is we start to believe that our loneliness is a result of our own faults, and we believe that we aren't likable enough or we aren't good enough or worthy of connection, and that continues to isolate us more. But when we serve others, we take the focus off of ourselves and put it onto another person, allowing for more connection. We also remind ourselves that we do have something to contribute to that relationship or our community or our society. Acts of service can be really small things. It can be checking in on a neighbor who's older and higher risk of COVID. It could be delivering groceries or snacks or a care package to a friend having an especially hard time during distancing. The small things like that really help us maintain connection even when we can't be physically close to the people that matter.
That was awesome. Thank you, guys. I think you've inspired me to take 15 minutes today to call someone I love. Please join us for our next episode. We are going to take a deep dive into implicit bias. Bye, guys.